Hi, this is Dan Perkins, and tonight I'm going to talk about Hillary Clinton's firewall may be on fire.
I'm going to talk about, this is Don Mazzella, and I'm going to talk about how water is becoming the new oil as far as commodities are concerned.
Guys from Verona. Each week, you will hear from Dan Perkins, a financial expert, a regular columnist for the Hill website, and best-selling author, and Don Mazzella, a veteran journalist, author, and radio host talking about things that concern you politically, financially, and socially. They will also try to give listeners a heads up on future happenings. We start off each program with Dan Perkins' essay on what he considers an important issue facing us.
Well, good evening again, Don. We got another show to go to, so let's see if we can entertain some people.
Well, hopefully we inform them as well.
Yeah, well, entertain them first and then inform them second. I want to start off tonight with a piece that I wrote for the Daily Surge, which just literally came out today, and that is the concept of Hillary Clinton has a firewall that they've talked about during these presidential primaries, and that has been the black vote in the South and the black vote in general. And when you look at what's going on, well, Bernie is not necessarily appealing to the black vote per se. Mrs. Clinton, I think, is 0 for 8. Bernie's won 8 in a row. And what's happening is that I think that the tension that we're used to seeing in the Republican debates and the Republican campaign, because Bernie hasn't gone away, Mrs. Clinton is getting more shrill and more exaggerated, and has tended to make some significant gaffes, which we have talked about on this program in the past. I think that part of the problem is that maybe the black Democrats in the South voted for Hillary in the primaries more of a sympathy vote rather than something that they're committed to in the November election. I'm reminded recently where Bill Clinton was on the stump for Hillary, and he was being interrupted at a speech where by people from Black Lives Matter, who were saying to Mr. Clinton that he was had not done anything for black people. And he challenged them, perhaps inappropriately, one, for an ex-president, but two, a speaker for the Democratic Party, to challenge a minority group, primarily of blacks, when he said that they were basically not interested in taking care of the black race because they were not protesting the murders that are taking place in Chicago and Memphis and around the country. And he got some heat because of his break with the tradition. But see, I know that I've talked about this before, Don, on other shows. I think that in the past, the Democrats appeal to the black party and the black people in this country is that their hearts are in the right place. They just can't figure out how to execute. And I think the fact that the Black Lives Matter, which went after Trump, now went after the Hillary campaign, and there was a speech in Virginia where there was a woman protester in front of Hillary from Black Lives Matter. I think that the black people have begun to realize that not only when we got our first black president, although some people swear that Bill Clinton was the first black president, that the black community has become disenchanted with, or let's say some factions of the black community have become disenchanted with the Democratic Party, and more specifically, the Clintons. And I think that perhaps if she gets the nomination, and I know you still believe she won't, but if there's a wild chance that she might get the nomination, I suspect that there are going to be black people who are going to protest and are not going to be interested in supporting her for the nomination either. Don?
Well, 4 things. Number one, let's be perfectly honest and talk about something that people don't want to talk about. But black churches are really a center of black power. and the ministers there. If you look at the financing of the various Clinton supporting PACs and actually government, there's a lot of money spent in those churches to get out the vote when the pastor's talking about it. That's number one. And that's what happened, I'm told, by several different sources that happened in the South for Hillary Clinton's victories. They weren't ones where people came because of conviction. They came because there was something in it for them. Number two, there's several polls that indicate that black support for Hillary Clinton is not as strong as she would like it, and her minions are doing everything they can to push up the support. At the same time, if you look at Bernie Sanders' vote, he's not doing very well with the blacks. In fact, if you analyze the vote as some people are doing, this is essentially Bernie's winning in states where the white non-black turnout is heavier than anything else. And what Bernie is attracting are first-time voters and younger voters. And that's an interesting point. Now, there's a survey just out for the New York race, which was really the pivotal race. If Sanders hits 45% or better, or God forbid in Hillary's terms, he wins this, then we've got a whole new ball game. She is very vulnerable in the electorate, and all people are saying about her is she's the lesser of the two evils between her and Trump. Well, everything you're saying is true. It's just a matter of how you want to interpret it, and is it enough for the blacks to stay home in November?
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot as I wrote that piece, and I know that the idea that the Democrats are more compassionate and more caring than the Republicans has been the cry of the Democratic Party, especially to the black people. But I get a sense that dog isn't hunting, as you said, maybe not as good as it used to, or maybe not good enough for Hillary in what she's trying to do. But I do believe the idea that we've gone, since the Civil Rights Act of 1965, the progress that's been made by the black community seems to continually slow. It doesn't seem to get any better. And as a result, the idea that the Democratic Party has the heart, the Republicans are mean old people, old white people who don't care about black people and want to keep them, as Joe Biden said, keep them in chains. It just seems to me that there's a lot more rhetoric of black people speaking against the Democratic Party than I can ever remember. I do think it's important that that what you're talking about with Bernie, Bernie is trying to position himself as much like Trump and Cruz are, as Washington outsiders, to try and get things changed. But he seems to be attracting young people, and that's a subject that I want to talk about a little later in the show. How the kinds of things that are going on, for example, now today reporting Hillary is accusing Bernie of dirty tricks, of stealing delegates. Some of the things that are being said about the Republicans are now coming out of Hillary's mouth against Bernie Sanders, and so both sides are getting pretty ugly.
Go
ahead.
No, in short, politics as usual. When it comes to prizes like the presidency, everything goes out the window. But I want to point out that Bernie Sanders is a U.S. senator. How much inside can you be in Washington than a U.S. senator outside of president? I mean, it's really funny when he says he's not an insider, but in fact he is.
Well, but you can also look at Cruz, who is a Washington insider, and I hear the music, so we got to take a break. We'll be back and continue the conversation. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. You're listening to Two Guys from Verona. Once again, here's your hosts, Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella.
Dan, I want to talk about something that's going to affect us in the future. Essentially, I want to talk about water. There are three events that happened over the last week and a half that I think are very important. One, the mayor of New York, de Blasio, tried to siphon off $300 million earmarked for the completion of the third water tunnel, which would in fact have secured water for Brooklyn, a borough of New York. And when it was finally shown that that's what he was doing, there was such a hue and a cry, because water is now, but will in the future, be much more important and much more expensive. Our infrastructure, as you know, is crumbling, and the New York water tunnels, one was built in the 19th century, the other one in 1936. So it's important that those be protected. On the West Coast in California, as the Wall Street Journal pointed out, they're fighting a plan by a private company to dip into the underground reservoir or aquifilter that exists underneath Colorado, and bring that water to Los Angeles. The environmentalists are crying foul, etc. But the point is that without water, cities will die. The third thing that's happening, and you brought it up, is people are starting to realize that they're going to have to start moving water as much as they're moving oil between various parts of the country. Now, what does it mean for you and me? It means that water will, in the estimate of some economists, represent 10% of a family's budget by the year 2025 in terms of costs. When you put in city taxes, water taxes, etc., it's an issue that we're not talking about much now, but we will be in the future. There were a couple of science fiction stories that I read almost 40 years ago or 50 years ago, talked about...
That many years ago?
That many.
You were reading it 50 years ago? Wow, okay.
I just barely got out of the ABCs.
Okay.
Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that these science fiction stories were talking about water drought. We're facing it today, and the thing is that most of the technology to create fresh water out of seawater is owned by the Israelis. That's a little known fact, but it is true.
Right.
And all of these things tell me that if we don't start waking up to the problem of water, moving it, keeping it pure. In Newark, New Jersey, where 50 years ago, when I was still a young baby, the Anheuser-Busch located a major brewing plant in Newark because of the pure water. Now they're complaining that that water is tainted. The water is not tainted. The pipelines are. All of these things tell us that that's going to be a major cost. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I happened to have an opportunity a few years ago to fly with my wife to Australia. I was a tag-along husband. I went down to Melbourne to play Royal Melbourne Golf Course, where she was busy at a meeting in Sydney. And I flew from Sydney to Melbourne, and the guy sitting next to me was a regional vice president for Coca-Cola out of Australia. And I said, what's the fastest growing segment of the Coca-Cola franchise? He said, bottled water. I said, okay, I can understand that. I said, what I don't understand is that, and it's even true today, you can go into the grocery store to buy a gallon of water, not from the dispenser, but a bottle of Poland Spring or whatever, a gallon of water is more expensive than a gallon of gasoline. And if you think about it, what does it cost to get a gallon of gasoline? You've got to drill a hole in the ground. You've got to try and find the crude oil. You got to bring it up. You got to pump it to a refinery. You got to refine it. Then you got to put it in trunks and bring it to the gas station, put it underground so they can pump it into cars. Much more capital intensive, and yet a gallon of gasoline is cheaper than a gallon of water. And it's only going to get worse. I think that water is a commodity that we take for granted. Although a lot of people in California, when they went through that very serious drought there for years, and portions of California are still in a drought, were very concerned. It was interesting to me to read all the articles of the water police in California. And where they spent a great deal of their time was in Hollywood and Beverly Hills. And all of the Hollywood stars who were pumping water like crazy and letting it run in the streets, and they were not dealing with the water restrictions because they felt that that was beneath them. They were somebody special. They deserved to have more than their fair share of water. It is a very precious commodity. I do think that desalinization will be a significant solution. And you're right, the Israelis do have the technology. If we had better relations with Israel, perhaps we could get them to give us more of that technology. But clearly, the major cities on the West Coast and the East Coast could use desalinization technology. I want to go back, though, and ask you a question about the early part of your opening monologue here. There were, did you say $360 million that de Blasio wanted to divert?
Yes.
What did he want to divert it to?
Well, that's it. They couldn't figure it out. It suddenly disappeared from the municipal budget. All it said was it was earmarked, then was out. And somebody read the municipal budget and realized that it wasn't there. The money was there to drill the wells to connect up with the pipeline so that you could draw the water up and distribute it in Brooklyn. As it happened, this leg was designed for Brooklyn, and when people began to realize what happened, there was such a hue and cry, but people admitted they had never really thought about it because everybody just thought they're
Turn
just
on the spigot and the water's there.
Yeah,
right.
But don't forget, up until about 10 years ago, you paid a flat rate for water in New York City. Now, the average increase is 2.5% a year as the price of water goes up. And the price of water, on average, goes up almost 2% across the nation to households. And it's also what major businesses are beginning to realize will be a major expense coming forward.
Did you follow the story in Flint, Michigan with the lead contamination in the water?
But again, the contamination came from the stream and from the pipelines. Most of our cities use copper or lead piping, primarily piping, and that's all. That's 100-year piping, and that was put in the first part of the 20th century, and now they're eroding away. We have a massive, as you and I have said before, infrastructure problem: roads, bridges, and water. All three of which are important to our lives, and all three of which are going to cost money in the foreseeable future. It's not away more than 5 years.
But it's interesting. We've talked about the politicians who have said what we need is, including Barack Obama when he first took office, we need roads, bridges, and teachers. They didn't build the roads, they didn't repair the bridges, but they did hire a bunch of union people. And so
the union forever, don't you know that?
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, I understand that. But we keep talking about, again, the Democrats keep talking about public works projects, but they don't get them done. I mean, we had $750 billion stimulus package were, quote, shovel-ready jobs that weren't shovel-ready. The president, again, lied to us and promised things to the unions, but it never came through. It never delivered on the promise. So,
Well,
go ahead.
did you see today's paper how one of those projects was delivering new cars to Amtrak, but one of the requirements was that they had to be 100% American made, and the companies cannot deliver because they couldn't deliver all the products. It's a very interesting article today in the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, well, it's I used to live in Chatham, New Jersey, and New Jersey Transit ordered all these cars for going into the New York, and they ordered the wrong voltage, so they had to change the whole wiring system. It took them years and years and years to change the wiring system to use the cars. We got to take a break. We'll be back shortly, so stay tuned. More of Two Guys from Verona. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Two Guys from Verona.
There you go, fellas.
Don
Clear.
Mazzella. They'll be right back after these messages.
How does it sound to you?
An important message
Sounds
for
good.
all
Sounds good to
Americans
me.
who owe $10,000 or more in back taxes to the IRS. The tax
You're
pros at
you're
OIC
right
Tax
about the
can
water,
help
too.
you. Call 800-707-14.
We're always right, Chad.
You qualify for the IRS Financial Hardship Program. OIC Tax can stop the IRS.
What are you going to talk about the third?
Help you get back on track with your
Dan?
tax problem.
I want to talk about
429 for a free consultation. That's
the
800
failure of the Obama administration this weekend when the Iranian government said that we're not talking about our ballistic missiles.
Hi, I'm
They're
Joan
not on the table.
and I know how difficult
And
senior care for
what it's saying about the Iran agreement and the ability of the federal government, our United States government, to enforce that treaty. We're in serious, serious trouble.
Well, it's just a year old.
So what?
No, I mean it's just a year old, and we're already realize now we're calling it an agreement, not a treaty.
Right.
You
Well,
notice
we
that?
could never call it a treaty because it was never ratified as a treaty by the Senate.
But you know, but the Obama administration is treating it as a treaty.
Treating it as a treaty. Right.
a place for mom.
Call a place for mom in the next 10 minutes to get your free
All right,
ebook
fellas,
on
coming
financing
back.
senior care, as well as free information on senior living communities in your area. Call 1-800-6128. That's 1-800-750-6128.
Welcome back. You're listening to Two Guys from Verona. Once again, here's your hosts, Dan Perkins and Don Mazzella.
Welcome back to Two Guys from Verona. This is Dan Perkins again, and I want to talk about this segment, our esteemed President of the United States. Now, some of you may have seen on Sunday morning the President's interview with Chris Wallace, and it was a retrospective of his presidency. He talked about a lot of things. His greatest accomplishment was Obamacare. His greatest disappointment was, according to the president, that we didn't plan very well knowing who the successor was going to be for Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. And
What difference does it make?
somebody else said that, I think. The junior senator from New York made that comment when she was no longer Secretary of State. He said that, but if you analyze what he's saying as it relates to foreign policy, the mistake we made in Libya was we didn't know who the successor was going to be. Well, we tried to get rid of Morsi, and we don't know who the successor was going to be. We got rid of the leadership in Egypt. We knew that the Muslim Brotherhood was going to be there, but we didn't figure that the army was going to come and throw them out in such a short period of time. So our president doesn't seem to have a very good track record in trying to figure out how to relate with the rest of the world. Now, the other thing, so if he feels that what happened in Libya was a failure of his administration, the one person credited with the pushing the president to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi was one Miss Hillary Clinton. And she can't remember that Americans died in Libya on her watch while they were transitioning to the government that never materialized. The second thing that happened this weekend that really burns me is that the Iranian government is now saying that the ballistic missile program that they are engaged in testing, they are not going to be talking to the United States or anybody about what limitations should be put on the ballistic missile. Now, I was an infantry guy in the Army. I wasn't an officer. But it does seem pretty easy that once you design the ballistic missile, to convert to a nuclear warhead is not that big a switch. So here we have the president and through the Secretary of State, John Kerry, saying to the world, well, we would like to talk to you about that. And the Iranians are basically saying, go pound sand. Their arrogance continues. The same arrogance was there when they were negotiating this agreement for 3 years. The other thing that they said that was interesting this weekend is they might, if we're really nice to them, consider the possibility of giving us our captives back. The people that they could negotiate in 3 years of negotiations on this agreement, get Americans who have been held hostage for almost 4 years. So I thought it was a really, really bad weekend for America again, and for our foreign policy, and for the reputation of our president. Now, he's on the road next week. He's going to go back to the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, probably to apologize for something again. And he's going to go visit the World War II Hiroshima and Nagasaki bomb sites. I have no idea, except maybe he's going to apologize for us bombing them in the Second World War. But I just think he's continuing to degrade the office of president, to degrade the country. And as I saw recently where Michelle Obama said she couldn't wait to get out of town, I guess I can't wait for them to get out of town either.
Well, Dan, let me I guess ask you a question.
Okay.
Which just went out of my mind, but that's okay. I'll think of it in a moment, but I'll say two things. I really feel this president is conducting a world tour, and he's trying to shore up his legacy. The second thing is, surprisingly, his approval rating has gone above 50%. That normally happens during the swan song of a president, with the possible exception of the second Bush. But to the American people, he apparently, they're saying he's a good old boy, to use an expression. But how do you feel?
Wait a minute. A good old boy for a black president?
Good old boy? Yeah.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
If he does go to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, who's going to be there to say to him that it saved 1 million American casualties? Even the revisionist historians have now come around to the realization that the bombing, the A-bomb, was the only way to really shake the ability of the Japanese people to resist an American invasion.
I'll bet you, Mr. Mazzella, coffee and a great big apple fritter at Panera Bread, he finds a way to apologize.
Unfortunately, I can't take it because I agree with you. We'll have one anyway, but I agree with you wholeheartedly. I feel he's very, very much into this business of apologizing for America's past. It's an unfortunate fact, and Hillary Clinton is not doing very much to differ. Her big thing was that she was going to give New York City $80 million for their anti-terrorist efforts, but she hasn't come out and distanced herself from President Obama. nor do I think she will, either now or the general election. But he did say something in those same interview that I think is extremely important. He said he thought that whatever Hillary did in terms of the emails was unintentional and should not be really blamed. How do you feel about that?
It was unintentional 2,200 times.
Mm.
Some people say, if you do something repeatedly, but you expect a different outcome when you do it again, that's a definition of insanity. But that's for another discussion. I just think that the idea that she had no responsibility. I mean, I keep coming back to Petraeus. The man released an appointment calendar to his autobiographer and mistress, and he pleaded to a misdemeanor, got a substantial fine. That's a hell of a lot different than transmitting above top secret emails that even the White House was refusing to let be released because of the highly secretive nature. So I know that you think that they're going to announce on the Friday before Memorial Day that there's a deal cut and that she's going to get charged with a misdemeanor and she's going to pay a fine. I hope not. But we've got about 5 minutes in this break. I want to go something on. Don and I were talking earlier today about what happened in Colorado, and whether or not Mr. Trump was treated fairly or unfairly, and did he understand the rules of the game or not. And I thought about what Don was saying, and I, to some degree, agree with what he's saying. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought about what was the dynamic that was changing, not so much in Colorado, but what was the unique dynamic on both the Republican and the Democratic side, except Hillary, in this presidential campaign. And I would say that the most impressive dynamic that took place with Trump, with Cruz, with all the other Republicans, and Bernie Sanders. The 17 Republican candidates and Bernie Sanders struck a chord with many, many Americans about what the hell is going on in our country. And so they related pretty well to them. But the other thing that happened was there was a movement that created opportunities for Republicans, Democrats, independents, men, women, LBGT, whatever you are, whatever you want to be, much broader involvement. We had huge turnouts in the Republican primaries all over the country and caucuses, except in Colorado. We didn't have much of a turnout there. But even Bernie was getting votes that nobody figured he was going to get. Here's my concern, not so much about what happened in Colorado. I heard tonight when I was out to dinner, the chairman of the Republican National Committee is proposing some changes in the rules. There's a rule in the committee, or the rule of the Republican Party, that govern the primaries and the requirement that in order to be nominated on the first ballot, a candidate had to participate in one at minimum of 8 primaries. So under that rule, Mr. Trump and Mr. Cruz are the only ones who could be nominated on the first ballot. They could not nominate John Kasich from Ohio because he didn't win 8 primaries. What I heard tonight was that there was a dinner in New York yesterday where the chairman of the Republican National Committee is considering at the rules meeting next week to allow the majority of delegates in a state to personally attest to their liking of a particular candidate. And if they can get 8 states, I use the word states, but I'm going to clarify that, they can get 8 states to personally affirm their support for a candidate through the delegates, that person's name could go on the first ballot. Now, the commentator said this evening that the 5 territories are in the pocket of the chairman of the Republican National Committee. So all he needs is to have 3 other states affirm the motion in the Rules Committee, and theoretically, nobody who ran could be nominated on the first ballot based on the rules changes that they're talking about in the convention. Here's my concern. I know and we can finish this after this next break, but my concern is this, Don, is that regardless of whether there's funny games that are being played, and regardless of whether or not Mr. Trump knew the rules of Colorado or any other state, there are a lot of people who are engaged in this political process who very possibly are going to be disappointed and disenfranchised and give up on America. And I think that that's a huge price to pay for the insiders in Washington or in Colorado or any other state who are not allowing the individuals in mass to decide what their candidate's going to be. And I'm very concerned that we are not only destroying a new branch of people that got involved in the political process, but perhaps even the next generation. And I think we need to take a break here again, and when we come back, we can continue the conversations. So we'll be right back.
You're listening to Two Guys from Verona.
Fellas, clear?
Dan, if 8 states affirm a candidate can be nominated?
That's what Previs said in a dinner last night. He is contemplating proposing to the Rules Committee next week in Florida. Not that he's going. Now, he didn't say he was committed to doing that. He is thinking about doing that, which means that any candidate, any person who would like to seek the office of president, if he can get 8 states, the candidates to personally affirm, even though they may be Trump or Cruz or Kasich supporters, if he can get 8 states, and he has 5 in his pocket, because the territories are considered states under the rules of the convention, then that person's name can go on the ballot in the first ballot.
Didn't I say earlier, Dan, that something would happen?
Well, I'm not saying he didn't.
He didn't. No, he floated that as a trial balloon,
right?
Because they got some things. It's like typical politics. We'll go to the outer edge, and then we'll compromise, and I'll get half of what I wanted, which is what I wanted. Politics is the art of compromise.
All right, fellas, coming back.
Dan Perkins' new book, also available.
.com.
In this final segment, Don and Dan offer their predictions on what's going to happen in our world.
Okay,
Well,
Don,
Dan,
you get a chance to my monologue there.
Well, all I was going to say, Dan, is it's politics as usual. If you read of American conventions, or if you've ever been to one, it's one of the most exciting things in the world, because you see the ebb and flow of emotions, which oftentimes are totally irrational or out of step with what people thought they would do or how they would do it, etc. I've been to a few conventions, and I've always felt at the end of it as if I've lived in a totally different world. And people will tell you that who've been there. Having said that, I think there's a lot of people on the Republican side who feel, as I do, that Trump is simply not the right candidate for this election. You used the words disenfranchised. Well, the American people have never been exactly right all the time on who they wanted and who they didn't want. Thank God the Republic has survived some of the bad ones and even elected some of the really good ones. I think in this case, a Trump Clinton contest would not be good for America. And I think the Republicans, and by the way, the Democrats are beginning to realize, we're focusing on the Republican side, but the Democrats don't have an A team out there in the presidential race. And between the two of them, we as Americans, out of our 300 and 400 million people, should be able to find two better candidates for the presidency than the two we have facing us right now. And hopefully
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just going to close with hopefully my prediction that neither one will be the candidate holds true for the good of the republic.
Well, I understand, and I know you continue to believe that she's not going to get the nomination. I believe that the American people have a right to have a voice, and I look at the National Archives, as I've been there many, many times, and I look at that document that starts off that says, "We the people." It doesn't say, "We the minority leadership of the Republican Party get to decide who the people are going to vote for." It doesn't say that we, the minority, the rich and the elite of the Democratic Party, get to decide who's the best candidate for the rest of the people. The document says, "We, the people." And I am concerned that the games that are being played with the rules of how these conventions function, whether Democrat or Republican, are ultimately disenfranchising the American electorate and turns them off even more. I'm really concerned that in Colorado, that the people in the state didn't get a voice in whether the rules should be changed. You said earlier today that the changes in the rules that were taking place in Colorado were because Colorado believed, the Republican Party believed, that they had to do something with the fact that there were going to be 17 candidates.
At the time, whether that was true or not. But Dan, let me just go to the real heart of it. You talk about the American people in general have never really chosen the candidates. You and I were brought up in an era where the party bosses decided, and by and large they decided better than the American people at the time. You can go back, Jim Farley and with Franklin Roosevelt. He got him the nomination. The group around Eisenhower got him the nomination. The group around Ronald Reagan got him the nomination. You're asking the American people to choose, and they voted. And they voted in some cases for, I believe, a demagogue in Donald Trump, because most of what he said, you and I both know, can't be implemented. And yet, yes, his ideas sound good, but when they break them down, they don't. We live in a world that's different.
And how do you? Excuse me for interrupting.
No, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's but I'm not buying the story, and the reason I'm not buying the story is because what we're hearing on the Democratic side is just as undeliverable that you're accusing Mr. Trump of. Hillary Clinton says she's going to, along with Bernie Sanders, we're going to make college free for everybody. Well, and it's only going to cost $350 billion. First of all, it's only going to cost $350 billion for 10 years. Well, if you understand that the average bill to run the colleges and universities in the United States today on an annual basis is $4 trillion a year, $350 billion doesn't go anywhere over 10 years. it pays less than 8 months worth of tuition. It's unworkable. Just as much as perhaps Trump's idea to build the wall might be unworkable, then, and I'm saying that it isn't Trump isn't any more a demagogue than Hillary or Bernie.
I agree with you. I'm not arguing that point.
But you're
I
saying
agree wholeheartedly.
You're saying he's a demagogue. He shouldn't be elected. Well, neither is Hillary. Neither is Bernie.
I agree wholeheartedly. But none of the candidates sitting out there today, including Cruz, stand there and say to me, "Those are the man or woman that we want to lead the greatest nation on earth."
And I have an answer for your question. The reason why we have the people we have to choose from today is that perhaps people who might be better candidates and might be better presidents or vice presidents don't want to go through the crap that Megyn Kelly and the rest of the reporters are doing and what's happening.
I couldn't agree more. You're absolutely right.
So until we change the media, which is controlled by the Democratic Party, then you're never going to get there.
Having been a White House reporter and been in Washington, I couldn't agree with you more. And Dan, you hit it on the nail on the head. You're right, and I wish you were wrong, but you're not. We as journalists of the old school fight an uphill battle, and the unfortunate part is, as I just found out just before going on the air, some of them were dying off. But can I just off topic for 1 minute, just to talk about
you don't have
something.
A minute. Go ahead. Make it quick.
No, real quick. Do you know that the Bible was among the 10 most argued against books in America's libraries? I couldn't believe that. But people complained about the Bible. Yeah. I just could not believe it. I didn't want to pass this program without talking about it.
Okay, all right. So it's time for us to say goodnight. This is Dan Perkins.
And Don Mazzella.
And if it's important to you, it's important to us. And listen to us next week when we have our first guest on the air. Good night.
You've been listening to Two Guys from Verona.